My father-in-law revised his will just one day before passing. Now I finally get why they all tried so hard to keep me from seeing it. I should have known something was wrong when my husband Caleb started acting strange the week before his father died. Bernard had been battling cancer for months, and we all knew the end was coming. But suddenly Caleb was having hushed phone calls with his sister Denise and stepping outside whenever I walked into the room. Family business, he'd mutter when I asked what was going on. The night before Bernard passed, I woke up to find Caleb's side of the bed empty. I found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m. staring at his phone with hollow eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nearly jumped out of his skin. "Dad's lawyer called," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Some last-minute paperwork." I should have pressed him for details. Should have demanded to know why paperwork couldn't wait until morning, but I was exhausted from months of hospital visits and managing the family business while everyone else fell apart. When Bernard died the next morning, the whole family gathered at the estate. That's when the weird behavior really started. Denise kept steering me away from family conversations. Caleb's brother, Leo, would stop talking whenever I entered a room. Even their mother, usually warm toward me, seemed distant and kept avoiding eye contact. "Maybe you should skip the will reading," Caleb suggested gently. "It's going to be boring legal stuff anyway. You've been through so much stress lately." "I'm part of this family, too," I reminded him. "I want to be there for whatever happens." The look that passed between him and Denise should have been my first real warning. It was the kind of look people share when they're keeping a secret from someone standing right in front of them. The reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Bernard's attorney's office. I'd been to plenty of family meetings there over the years. Bernard often included me in business discussions, saying I had a good head for numbers and a fresh perspective. That morning, Caleb tried one more time to convince me to stay home. "Are you sure you want to come? I could just tell you everything later. Maybe we could take a vacation afterward. Just the two of us." "Why are you so eager to keep me away?" I asked, studying his face. "What aren't you telling me?" "I'm not," he said quickly. "I just thought you might be uncomfortable with all the family drama." But I was already uncomfortable. The whole family was acting like I was a stranger at a funeral I didn't belong at. At the lawyer's office, I noticed immediately that someone had rearranged the seating. Usually, I sat next to Caleb near the front. Today, there was a single chair pushed against the back wall, clearly meant for me. I ignored it and took my usual seat next to my husband. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looked nervous as he shuffled through papers. He kept glancing at the family, then at me, then back at his documents like he was dreading what came next. "Before we begin," he said carefully, "I want to note that Mr. Bernard made some significant changes to his will just hours before his passing." The room went dead silent. The changes were made voluntarily and witnessed properly. Mr. Sterling continued, however, they were unexpected. Denise shifted uncomfortably. Caleb was staring at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Mr. Sterling began reading the standard language, then got to the specifics. The estate was worth roughly $12 million, the family textile business, 3 properties, and substantial investments. To my daughter, Denise, I leave the family home and $500,000. Denise nodded, unsurprised. To my son, Leo, I leave the Colorado cabin and $500,000. Also expected to my son Caleb, I leave $500,000. I waited for him to mention the business. Bernard had always promised it would go to Caleb, his eldest son and heir apparent. Instead, Mr. Sterling paused and looked directly at me. "The remainder of my estate, including controlling interest in Sterling Weave, I leave to my daughter-in-law." The room erupted. "That's impossible," Denise shrieked, jumping to her feet. "He wouldn't do that. She's not even blood family." Leo was already on his phone, presumably calling another lawyer. Caleb just sat there, his face white as paper, looking like someone had just told him his entire life was a lie. "There must be some mistake," their mother said, her voice shaking. "Bernard always said the business would stay in the family." "It is staying in the family," I said quietly, though my heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear my own voice. "You're not family," Denise spat. "You're just some woman who married my brother." Mr. Sterling held up his hand for silence. "There's more," he said. Mr. Bernard also left a sealed letter to be read aloud at this time. He pulled out an envelope and broke the wax seal. The paper looked thick and expensive, the kind Bernard used for important business correspondence. "If you're hearing this," he began reading in Bernard's words, "it means I'm dead, and it means my family tried to prevent my daughter-in-law from attending this reading." Every eye in the room turned to me. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare where everyone knew the script except me. For the past 18 months, I've been watching my children conspired to steal from the woman who saved our family business. What they don't know is that I've been recording their conversations. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. What conversations? What conspiracy? Mr. Sterling continued reading, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. 18 months ago, Sterling Weave was hemorrhaging money. Poor management and bad investments had brought us to the edge of bankruptcy. My children were already planning to sell the company and split the proceeds, caring nothing for the legacy our family built over 4 generations. This was news to me. I'd been working as the company's financial consultant for 3 years, but I'd been focused on specific projects. I'd never seen the full financial picture. Let me step back and explain how I got involved with the Sterling family in the first place. 7 years ago, I was a recent MBA graduate working for a small consulting firm that specialized in helping family businesses modernize their operations. Bernard had hired us after his previous consultant recommended a complete overhaul of their antiquated accounting systems. I remember walking into the Sterling Weave headquarters for the first time. It was a massive brick building that had been in continuous operation since 1892. The main floor still housed the original weaving machines, though they had been updated with modern technology. The smell of cotton and dye was overwhelming at first, but somehow comforting. Bernard himself gave me the tour that first day. He was 68 then, still sharp as a tack with calloused hands that spoke of decades spent understanding every aspect of his business. He didn't just own the company, he lived and breathed it. "My great-grandfather started this company with 2 looms and a dream," he told me as we walked through the production floor. "Every generation has added something to it. My grandfather mechanized the operation. My father expanded into synthetic blends. I computerized everything and started our export business. What's next?" I asked. "That's what I'm hoping you'll help me figure out." What I discovered was a company caught between 2 worlds. The traditional textile business was being undercut by overseas manufacturers with drastically lower labor costs. But Sterling Weave had something their competitors didn't. A reputation for quality that had taken over a century to build. "We need to find our niche," I told Bernard after my initial analysis. "We can't compete on price with overseas manufacturers, but we can compete on quality, service, and innovation." Over the next 6 months, I helped them transition into high-end specialty fabrics for luxury fashion houses. We developed relationships with sustainable cotton growers, invested in equipment for organic fabric production, and created a line of custom textiles that commanded premium prices. The transformation was remarkable. Within a year, Sterling Weave was not only profitable again, but thriving in ways it never had before. That's when Bernard asked me to marry his son. Well, not exactly, but he did invite me to a family dinner where I met Caleb, who had just returned from business school with grand plans to modernize the family business. Caleb was handsome, charming, and genuinely passionate about carrying on the family legacy. Our courtship was slow and sweet. Caleb would pick me up after work, and we'd drive through the countryside talking about our dreams for the future. He spoke eloquently about honoring his family's tradition while building something new and innovative. "I want to create something that my children will be proud to inherit," he said one evening as we sat by the lake near the family estate, "something that represents the best of what business can be." I fell in love not just with Caleb, but with his vision of what we could build together. When we married 2 years later, Bernard walked me down the aisle. My own father had died when I was in college, and having Bernard step into that role meant everything to me. "You're not gaining a daughter-in-law," he told the wedding guests during his toast. "You're gaining a daughter, and this family is gaining someone who understands what it means to build something that lasts." For the first few years of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. I continued working with the company as a consultant, gradually taking on more responsibility as Bernard began to trust my judgment. Caleb worked in sales and marketing, developing new client relationships and expanding our market reach. Denise managed the company's human resources and employee relations. She was 5 years older than Caleb, had never married, and seemed to view the family business as her primary identity. Leo, the youngest at 3 years younger than Caleb, oversaw production and quality control. We were a family business in the truest sense. Everyone had a role, everyone contributed, and everyone shared in the success. Or so I thought. It was my daughter-in-law who discovered the embezzlement scheme that was bleeding us dry. Mr. Sterling continued reading from Bernard's letter. She brought me evidence that my trusted CFO had been systematically stealing from us for years, using a complex system of fake vendors and inflated invoices. When she presented her findings, I asked her to help restructure our finances and rebuild what we'd lost. I remembered that discovery vividly. It was a Thursday afternoon in March, about 18 months before Bernard's death. I'd been reviewing the accounts payable records as part of a routine efficiency analysis when I noticed some irregularities. Several vendors were billing us for services that seemed unnecessary or overpriced. When I dug deeper, I found invoices for equipment maintenance on machines we'd sold years ago, consulting fees for projects that had never been approved, and supply purchases that never appeared in our inventory. At first, I thought it was just poor record-keeping. But the more I investigated, the more systematic the fraud appeared. The CFO, Victor Albright, had been with the company for 15 years. Everyone trusted him completely. He handled all the financial operations while Bernard focused on sales and production. The family had given him increasing autonomy over the years, grateful to have someone they could rely on for the complicated financial aspects of running a business. What I discovered was that Victor had been creating fake vendor accounts, submitting false invoices, and then transferring the payments to accounts he controlled. He'd stolen nearly $800,000 over 5 years, timing his thefts to coincide with busy periods when they were less likely to be noticed. When I brought my findings to Bernard, his first reaction was disbelief. "Victor's been like family to us," he said. "He's godfather to Leo's children." "I know," I said. "I hope I'm wrong, but these numbers don't lie." We spent 3 days going through every transaction I'd flagged. The evidence was overwhelming. Victor had betrayed the trust of a family that had treated him like a brother. "What do we do now?" Bernard asked when we'd finished our review. "We fire him, recover what we can, and file criminal charges," I said. "Will that destroy the company?" "It might," I admitted, "depending on how much damage has been done and whether we can recover the stolen money." That's when Bernard asked me to become more than just a consultant. "I need someone I can trust completely," he said. "Someone who sees the big picture and isn't afraid to make hard decisions. Will you help me rebuild this company?" I should have realized then that this decision would eventually put me at odds with his children. They'd grown up expecting to inherit leadership roles in the family business. Having their father turn to an outsider, even one who'd married into the family, must have felt like a betrayal of their birthright. But at the time, all I could think about was saving the company that had become such an important part of my life. Over the next year, she worked tirelessly to save our company. Mr. Sterling continued reading. She renegotiated our debts, streamlined our operations, and identified new revenue streams that I never would have thought of. She worked 16-hour days, sacrificed her own career opportunities, and turned down lucrative job offers to stay and help us. Because of her efforts, Sterling Weave is now more profitable than it's been in a decade. The rebuilding process was exhausting. After Victor's arrest, we discovered the financial damage was even worse than we'd initially calculated. The company was 3 months away from defaulting on several major loans. Our credit rating had been damaged by late payments that Victor had been making to cover his tracks. I spent weeks meeting with bank officials, creditors, and suppliers, negotiating payment plans and extensions. I had to convince them that the company was fundamentally sound despite the financial irregularities. Meanwhile, I was completely restructuring our internal financial systems. I implemented new approval processes, audit procedures, and oversight mechanisms to prevent future fraud. I negotiated new supplier contracts, reworked our pricing structure, and identified areas where we could reduce costs without compromising quality. The most challenging part was maintaining employee morale during the crisis. Word of Victor's embezzlement had leaked throughout the company, and people were worried about job security. I held town hall meetings, explaining the situation honestly while reassuring employees that we were taking steps to ensure the company's survival. During this period, I was essentially working 2 full-time jobs. I was still officially a consultant, but I was making decisions that should have been made by a chief financial officer or chief operating officer. I was at the office from dawn until late at night, sometimes sleeping on the couch in Bernard's office when there was too much work to go home. Caleb was supportive during this period, though I sensed some tension that I attributed to stress about the company's survival. He would bring me dinner at the office and listen patiently as I explained the latest crisis or breakthrough. "You're amazing," he would say. "I don't know how you're handling all of this." Looking back, I wonder if he was already starting to resent how much responsibility his father was giving me. But at the time, I interpreted his concern as admiration for my work ethic. The turnaround took about a year. We not only recovered from Victor's theft, but actually ended up stronger than before. The new financial systems I'd implemented gave us better visibility into our operations. The supplier relationships I'd renegotiated saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. The new client contracts I'd helped secure opened up markets we'd never accessed before. By the time Bernard was diagnosed with cancer, Sterling Weave was more profitable than it had been in years. What my children don't know is that 6 months ago, they held a meeting at Denise's house to discuss what they called the problem. Mr. Sterling continued reading from the letter. The room was dead silent except for the rustling of paper and Denise's quiet sobbing. The problem, according to my children, was that I trusted my daughter-in-law too much. They were concerned that she would eventually want a larger stake in the business, or that she might try to influence my estate planning. So, they devised a plan to protect what they saw as their inheritance. I felt sick to my stomach. The room was spinning slightly, and I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. Now, I understood why the family dynamics had felt strange during Bernard's illness. I attributed the tension to grief and stress about his deteriorating health, but apparently, they'd been planning my elimination from the family business. They decided that after my death, they would quietly push her out of the company. Caleb would tell her that the family needed to restructure and that her services were no longer needed. They planned to offer her a small severance package and make it clear that she was not truly part of the family. They discussed ways to make her feel unwelcome and isolated until she chose to leave on her own. I thought about all the subtle changes I'd noticed in recent months. How Denise had stopped including me in planning meetings. How Leo had become less collaborative when discussing operational changes. How even Caleb had seemed more distant, though I'd assumed it was because of stress about his father's illness. I'd been so focused on keeping the company running smoothly during Bernard's treatment that I hadn't realized his children were systematically excluding me from their plans for the future. I have recordings of this entire conversation which I've provided to Mr. Sterling. In these recordings, my children refer to her as the outsider and discuss how to legally exclude her from any inheritance or ongoing role in the company. They talk about her like she's a temporary employee rather than someone who has devoted 3 years of her life to saving what our family built. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the late nights I'd spend in the office, all the family dinners where I'd listen to their plans and dreams for the business. All the times they'd thanked me for my hard work and told me how grateful they were to have me as part of the family. Had it all been an act? Had they been planning to discard me even while I was working to save their inheritance? Most damning of all, the letter continued, is their discussion of my medical care. When I was hospitalized last month, they met to discuss whether I was mentally competent to make financial decisions. They planned to have me declared incompetent if I tried to change my will in her favor or give her any significant role in the business succession. Leo's face had gone from pale to bright red. His mother was crying harder now, though whether from guilt or grief, I couldn't tell. They discussed hiring a specialist to evaluate my mental state, hoping to find evidence of dementia or diminished capacity. They were prepared to fight any changes I made to my estate plan, claiming that I was being manipulated or coerced. I remembered Bernard's hospitalization the previous month. He'd had pneumonia that had complicated his cancer treatment. The whole family had rallied around him, taking shifts at the hospital and consulting with doctors about his care. Or so I'd thought. Apparently, while I was focused on his medical needs, his children were meeting to discuss how to prevent him from recognizing my contributions to the family business. The idea that they would have their dying father declared incompetent to protect their inheritance was breathtaking in its callousness. But what they failed to realize is that I was never just protecting my business. I was protecting the only child who actually cared about preserving what our family built. While my biological children saw dollar signs and personal inheritance, she saw legacy and tradition and the responsibility that comes with carrying on something meaningful. Mr. Sterling looked up from the letter. The recordings Mr. Bernard mentioned are part of his estate files. As per his instructions, copies have been sent to your family's business attorney, your accountant, and your personal attorneys. The implications were staggering. Not only had they planned to betray me, but they'd done it so systematically and callously that Bernard felt compelled to secretly document their conspiracy. Denise was crying harder now, though I suspected it was more about the money than any sense of guilt or remorse. "This is ridiculous," she sobbed. She manipulated him. She probably wrote this letter herself. Dad was sick and confused toward the end. Mr. Sterling pulled out a thick manila folder. "Actually, Mrs. Sterling, your father provided quite detailed documentation of his decision-making process, including audio recordings, written correspondence, medical evaluations, and sworn statements from 3 different doctors confirming his mental competency right up until his death." He opened the folder and showed us copies of psychiatric evaluations, handwriting analyses, cognitive assessments, and sworn statements from doctors, nurses, and hospital staff. "Your father was very thorough," Mr. Sterling said quietly. He anticipated that his family would challenge this will, so he made sure to document his reasoning and mental state extensively. He also had multiple witnesses present when he made these changes, including 2 other attorneys who can testify to his competence. The letter wasn't finished. Mr. Sterling picked it up again and continued reading. "To my daughter-in-law, you have been more loyal to this family than my own children. You've earned every bit of what I'm leaving you. Not through manipulation or scheming, but through honest work and genuine care for our family's legacy. Don't let them guilt you into giving it back. Don't let them convince you that you don't deserve it. Use your inheritance to build something beautiful. Use your power to take care of the people who actually deserve it. And to my biological children, you've shown your true character, and it's deeply disappointing. The recordings I've left behind detail not just your plan to steal from her, but your complete lack of respect for everything I've worked to build. You care more about your inheritance than your integrity. You care more about maintaining your lifestyle than preserving our family's reputation. You've proven that you don't deserve to control the family legacy." Mr. Sterling set down the letter and pulled out another document. "There's one final provision," he said. "Mr. Bernard has established a trust that will pay each of his biological children $2,000 per month for the rest of their lives, provided they never contest this will, never interfere with the new ownership of Sterling Weave, and never publicly disparage their father's final wishes." The room was suffocating with tension. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, the distant sound of traffic outside, and the ragged breathing of people trying to process what they'd just learned. Caleb finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you known about this?" he asked me. "I didn't know about any of this," I said. "Honestly, I had no idea he was recording you or planning to change his will. I thought I was just helping with the business finances like I always had." "But you knew we were having family meetings," Denise accused, her voice sharp with anger and desperation. "I knew you were having meetings," I said. "I assumed they were about funeral arrangements, medical decisions, or normal family planning. I never imagined you were plotting to push me out of the company I helped save." Leo slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "This is insane," he said. "She's not even blood family. She married into this family 7 years ago. We've been here our whole lives. No, I said, standing up slowly. But apparently I'm the only one who actually acted like family. I'm the only one who worked to preserve what your father built instead of planning to profit from his death. You turned our father against us. Denise sobbed. You poisoned his mind. I saved his company. I replied. I discovered the embezzlement that was bleeding your family dry. I restructured the finances and rebuilt the business. I worked 16-hour days while you were planning how to get rid of me. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat diplomatically. If there are no further questions about the will itself, I'll need to discuss the transition of business ownership. As the new majority shareholder, Mrs. Sterling will need to decide how she wants to proceed with company leadership and management. I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd considered family for 7 years. People I'd worked alongside, shared holidays with, celebrated milestones with, and trusted with my career and my future. People who'd been planning to throw me away the moment their father died. I'll need some time to think about everything, I said. Of course, Mr. Sterling replied. This is a significant responsibility. Shall we schedule a follow-up meeting for next week to discuss the business transition? As we gathered our things to leave, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken recriminations and shattered relationships. Denise wouldn't even look at me. Leo was muttering under his breath about lawyers and legal challenges. Their mother was crying quietly into a handkerchief. Caleb grabbed my arm as I headed toward the door. We need to talk, he said, his voice urgent and desperate. Do we? I asked gently but firmly, pulling away from him. This doesn't have to change anything between us, he said. It's just business. We can figure this out together. I stared at him. This man I'd been married to for 7 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my plans for the future. Who'd been planning to betray me while I worked to save his family's legacy? Just business? I repeated. You planned to fire me from the company I saved. You discussed having your dying father declared incompetent. You called me the outsider and plotted to exclude me from the family I've devoted my life to serving. We were protecting the family interests, he said weakly. I was the family interests, I shot back. I was the one working to protect what your family built. I was the one who discovered the embezzlement, who restructured the finances, who turned the company around, and you were planning to throw me away like garbage. That night, I sat alone in our kitchen, a kitchen in a house that was paid for with sterling weave money, and read through the recordings and documents that Bernard had left me. They were far worse than the letter had suggested. The recordings revealed 18 months of systematic planning to betray me. Not only had they planned to push me out of the business, but they discussed ways to make me choose to leave voluntarily. Caleb had suggested making my work environment so hostile and uncomfortable that I'd quit on my own. Denise had proposed spreading subtle rumors about my competence and reliability to undermine my professional reputation. Leo had researched ways to challenge any gifts or inheritance their father might leave me, looking for legal loopholes that would allow them to reclaim anything he gave me. In one particularly painful recording, they discussed my personality and character in clinical dismissive terms. She's always been too ambitious, Denise said. I think she saw Dad as a way to advance her career. She's useful now, Leo agreed. But once the crisis is over, we need to get back to normal family management. The problem is that Dad treats her like she's his actual daughter, Caleb said. He includes her in decisions that should be family only. Well, she's not family, Denise replied. Not really, and we need to make sure she understands that. Most devastating of all was a conversation from just 2 weeks before Bernard's death where they discussed my marriage to Caleb. She's only with Caleb for the money anyway, Leo had said. Once Dad's gone and she's out of the business, she'll probably divorce him and try to take half of whatever he inherits. Good, Denise had replied. Better to get rid of her now than deal with her long term. She's been way too involved in family business from the beginning. Even Caleb had participated in this conversation. Maybe it would be better if we just ended up divorced, he'd said. Then I wouldn't have to worry about her having any claim to family assets or trying to influence how we run the business. They'd laughed about it. Actually laughed about ending my marriage and destroying my life. But there was more. In another recording, They discussed my professional reputation and how to damage it if I didn't cooperate with their plans. We could spread word that she was the one who missed the embezzlement initially, Caleb suggested. Make it seem like she was incompetent or possibly complicit. Or we could say she was having an affair with Victor, Denise added. That would explain why she was so involved in the financial details. That's brilliant, Leo said. It would destroy her credibility and make it impossible for her to work in this industry again. I'd given 7 years of my life to these people. I'd worked tirelessly to save their business, attended every family gathering, supported them through crises, celebrated their successes, and planned my entire future around being part of their legacy. And they'd seen me as a temporary inconvenience to be discarded when it became convenient. But the recordings also revealed something else. Bernard had been recording these conversations for months. He'd known exactly what his children were planning, and he'd been documenting their betrayal systematically. In one recording, I heard him talking to someone, probably his lawyer, about his discovery. I can't believe my own children would plot against someone who saved our family business. Bernard said she's been more loyal to this family than they have. What do you want to do about it? The other voice asked. I want to make sure she's protected. Bernard replied. I want to make sure that the person who actually deserves to inherit this legacy gets the chance to preserve it. Are you sure about this? It's going to tear your family apart. My children have already torn this family apart. Bernard said sadly. I'm just making sure the right person gets to put it back together. The next morning, I called Mr. Sterling. I've made my decision about the company. I told him. What would you like to do? I want to fire all 3 of them. I said immediately. I want them removed from any management positions, stripped of any company credit cards or access, and banned from company property. That's certainly within your rights as majority owner, he replied carefully. Though I should mention that their father did leave provisions for their monthly stipends, which might complicate. Those stipends were contingent on them not contesting the will or interfering with my ownership, I reminded him. But they didn't say anything about me choosing not to work with people who plan to systematically betray me. Very true, he said. Shall I prepare the termination paperwork? Yes. And I want to buy out their minority shares in the company completely. I'll pay fair market value, but I want them to have no ownership stake whatsoever. I want complete control. I'll have the business valued by an independent appraiser and make them a fair offer. He said. One more thing, I added. I want to change the company name. Sterling Weave is going to become something new, something that represents what I want to build going forward. What did you have in mind? Zenith Fabrics, I said. Because I'm going to honor the real heritage of this company, the values of hard work, integrity, and loyalty that built it in the first place. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and business transitions. The family initially tried to challenge the will, but their lawyers quickly advised them that Bernard's documentation was too thorough to contest successfully. Denise hired her own attorney and threatened to sue me personally for manipulating their father, but her lawyer dropped the case after reviewing the recordings. Apparently, it's hard to claim manipulation when there's audio evidence of you plotting to betray someone. Leo tried to rally the company employees against me, spreading rumors that I had somehow coerced Bernard into changing his will. But most of the employees had worked with me during the financial crisis and knew exactly how much I'd contributed to the company's survival. Caleb's reaction was the most painful. He alternated between pleading with me to be reasonable and accusing me of manipulating his dying father. He couldn't seem to understand that I had no knowledge of Bernard's plans. You must have known, he insisted during one of our last conversations as a married couple. You must have suspected something. I suspected that your family was acting strangely, I replied. I thought it was grief. I never imagined you were plotting to betray me. We weren't betraying you, he said. We were protecting the family business. From me? I asked. From the person who saved it? He didn't have an answer for that. 2 weeks later, I held my first board meeting as sole owner of what was now officially Zenith Fabrics. I'd kept all the employees who'd actually worked to build the company's success, but I'd brought in new senior leadership, people who shared my vision for ethical business practices and sustainable growth. The announcement of the ownership change and rebranding made the local business news. The article focused on my plans to expand the company's sustainable fabric lines and my commitment to maintaining local manufacturing jobs. The reporter asked about the circumstances of my inheritance. Mr. Bernard believed in rewarding loyalty and hard work. I said carefully. He wanted to ensure that the company would be led by someone who understood his values and vision for the future. I didn't mention the recordings or the family conspiracy. Some things were too painful and too personal to share with the public. The week after the news article appeared, Caleb moved out of our house. "I can't live with someone who destroyed my family," he said as he packed his clothes. "I didn't destroy your family," I replied calmly, sitting on our bed, watching him stuff shirts into suitcases. "I just refused to let your family destroy me." He paused in his packing and turned to face me. "Dad really manipulated you. You know, he turned you against us. He made you think we were plotting against you when we were just trying to protect the business." I pulled out the folder of recordings and documents. "Would you like me to play the part where you discussed making my work environment so hostile that I'd quit?" I asked. "Or maybe the part where you said our marriage should probably end anyway, so you wouldn't have to worry about me having any claim to family assets." His face crumbled. "You weren't supposed to hear that." "No," I agreed. "I was supposed to be quietly pushed out and then discarded, never knowing what you really thought of me. I was supposed to spend the rest of my life wondering what I did wrong. Why the family I'd worked so hard to serve suddenly didn't want me anymore." He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "It wasn't personal," he said. "It was just business. It was my life." I said, "My career, my marriage, my future. How is that not personal? We would have taken care of you." He insisted. "We would have given you a good severance package." "You would have thrown me away like an old employee," I corrected. "After I saved your family's business and devoted years of my life to building something I thought we'd share." He didn't have an answer for that. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Since I now own the business that represented most of our shared assets, and since Caleb clearly wanted nothing to do with me anymore, we were able to reach a settlement quickly. I kept the house and the business. He took his personal belongings and moved back in with his mother. The irony wasn't lost on me. The son who'd been expecting to inherit a business empire was now living in his childhood bedroom. 6 months later, Zenith Fabrics had its most profitable quarter in company history. I'd expanded our sustainable fabric lines, landed 3 major contracts with eco-conscious fashion brands, and opened a new production line focused on organic cotton blends. The success didn't happen by accident. I'd learned from the financial crisis that a business needs diversified revenue streams and strong relationships with multiple suppliers and customers. I'd also learned that treating employees well leads to better productivity and lower turnover. I implemented profit-sharing programs, improved healthcare benefits, and created clear advancement paths for workers who wanted to develop new skills. The company culture began to reflect my values rather than the traditional hierarchical approach that had characterized the Sterling Weave era. The day our success story appeared in the Regional Business Chronicle, I got a call from Denise. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You've torn apart a family that welcomed you and treated you like a daughter for years." "No," I corrected her. "I just refused to let a family that planned to discard me follow through on their plan." "We would have taken care of you," she insisted, echoing what Caleb had said. "We're not monsters. Like you took care of your father when you discussed having him declared incompetent. I asked like you were taking care of me when you planned to make my work environment so hostile that I'd quit." The line went quiet for a moment. He left those recordings to make sure I knew the truth. I continued. "The truth that I was never really family to you. I was just useful until I wasn't. You're making a mistake." She said family business should stay in the family. "It is staying in the family." I said it's staying with the person who actually treated it like family. But Denise's call made me realize that the family's resentment wasn't going away. Over the following months, I heard rumors that they were still trying to undermine my reputation in the business community. Leo was apparently telling people that I'd seduced their father into changing his will. Caleb was spreading stories about my ruthless ambition and how I'd manipulated a dying man. The rumors didn't gain much traction because too many people had witnessed my work during the financial crisis. But they were still hurtful, especially coming from people I'd once considered family. I decided to fight back in the most effective way possible by building something so successful and ethical that it would speak for itself. A year after Bernard's death, Zenith Fabrics was featured on the cover of Sustainable Futures magazine. The article detailed our innovative approach to eco-friendly manufacturing and our partnerships with fair trade suppliers around the world. More importantly, it told the story of how the company had been transformed from a traditional family business into a model of sustainable capitalism. Zenith Fabrics proves that companies can be profitable while doing good for the environment and their communities. The article concluded, under new leadership, this century-old business has found new life and purpose. That same week, I received a handwritten letter from Bernard's estate attorney. Inside was a note that Bernard had written, but instructed to be delivered exactly 1 year after his death. By now you know the truth about my children's character. It read in his familiar handwriting. I hope you've used your inheritance wisely. And I hope you understand that I didn't leave you that money and that business to punish them. I left it to reward you. You saved more than just my business when you discovered that embezzlement and helped me rebuild. You saved my family's legacy by proving that honor and loyalty and genuine care still exist in this world. My biological children learned to see the business as their right, their guaranteed inheritance. They never learned to see it as their responsibility. You understood from the beginning that legacy isn't about what you're given. It's about what you do with what you're given. Build something beautiful with what I've left you. Build something that lasts. Build something that makes the world a little bit better. And don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve it. You've earned every bit of it. The letter continued with specific advice about business challenges he anticipated I might face, along with contact information for suppliers and business partners he trusted. Even from beyond the grave, he was still mentoring me. But the most meaningful part was his final paragraph. I've watched you work for 3 years, and I've seen how you treat people. You don't just see employees. You see human beings with families and dreams and challenges. You don't just see customers, you see partners in building something meaningful. You don't just see profit. You see opportunity to create value for everyone involved. That's what real leadership looks like. That's what I want my legacy to represent. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference for women in business. During my presentation about building ethical companies, someone in the audience asked how I'd managed to take over a family business without any family connections. Actually, I said, I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when things get difficult. It's about who works to build something together instead of just waiting to inherit it. The man who left me his business understood that real family members are the people who see legacy as responsibility, not just opportunity. After the conference, several other business owners approached me with questions about sustainable manufacturing and ethical business practices. I realized there was an opportunity to share what I'd learned with other companies. That's how Summit Consulting was born. Working with other family businesses showed me that the dynamics I'd experienced with the Sterling family weren't unique. Many family enterprises struggle with succession planning, particularly when the next generation feels entitled to leadership roles without demonstrating competence or commitment. I developed a consulting practice focused on helping family businesses create merit-based succession plans and build cultures of accountability and ethical behavior. The work was deeply satisfying because it allowed me to help other families avoid the kind of destructive conflicts that had torn apart the Sterling family. 3 years after Bernard's death, Zenith Fabrics employed over 500 people across 2 manufacturing facilities. We'd become a leading supplier of sustainable fabrics to major fashion brands, and our ethical manufacturing practices had earned recognition from environmental organizations. But the personal cost had been significant. I'd lost a husband, a family, and the relationships I'd thought would last a lifetime. Still, I'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could build something meaningful on my own term. The lawsuit came in year 4. Despite the ironclad nature of Bernard's will and the devastating evidence of their conspiracy, Caleb and his siblings decided to challenge my ownership of the company. Their new legal strategy was to claim that I'd exercised undue influence over their father during his illness. They argued that I'd isolated him from his family and manipulated him into changing his will. It was a desperate move, but it tied up company assets and created uncertainty about the future of Zenith Fabrics. The legal battle lasted 8 months. During that time, I had to provide detailed testimony about my relationship with Bernard, my role in saving the company, and my knowledge of his final wishes. The Sterling siblings' attorneys tried to paint me as a calculating manipulator who'd seduced an elderly man into disinheriting his children. They questioned every conversation I'd had with Bernard, every business decision we'd made together, and every moment I'd spent alone with him during his illness. It was emotionally exhausting to have my motives questioned and my integrity attacked by people who'd once claimed to love me as family. But the evidence was overwhelming in my favor. The recordings of their conspiracy, the documentation of my contributions to the company, and the testimony of medical professionals who'd witnessed Bernard's mental competence throughout his illness all supported his final wishes. The case was ultimately dismissed with prejudice, meaning the Sterling family could never again challenge the will on these grounds. The judge's final comments were particularly satisfying. The evidence shows clearly that Mr. Bernard made his final decisions with full mental capacity based on years of observing the conduct and character of all parties involved. His choice to leave his business to someone who had demonstrated loyalty, competence, and genuine care for his legacy was entirely rational and well documented. The court finds no evidence of undue influence or manipulation. To the contrary, the evidence suggests that Mr. Bernard was protecting his legacy from individuals who had demonstrated questionable judgment and priorities. After the lawsuit was dismissed, I thought the Sterling family would finally leave me alone. But their resentment ran deeper than I'd realized. 6 months later, Leo started a competing textile company using contacts and knowledge he'd gained during his years at Sterling Weave. He named it Pinnacle Fabrics, apparently to confuse customers and suppliers. When that didn't work, Denise began spreading more serious rumors about my personal life and business practices. She claimed I was having affairs with married customers, that I was using company money for personal expenses, and that I was planning to sell Zenith Fabrics to overseas investors. None of it was true, but rumors in a small business community can be damaging even when they're false. I consulted with my attorneys about pursuing defamation claims, but ultimately decided that the best response was continued success and transparency. I opened Zenith Fabrics books to independent auditors and published detailed sustainability reports showing exactly how we operated. I invited business journalists to tour our facilities and interview our employees. The result was a series of articles that not only debunked the rumors, but showcased Zenith Fabrics as a model of ethical business practices. Transparency as strategy: How Zenith Fabrics builds trust through openness was the headline of one particularly favorable piece. 5 years after inheriting the company, I realized that my relationship with the Sterling family had fundamentally changed how I viewed business, family, and loyalty. I'd learned that blood relationships don't guarantee love, respect, or ethical behavior. I'd also learned that chosen family, the people who show up consistently and support your best self, can be more valuable than biological connections. The employees at Zenith Fabrics had become my chosen family. We'd built something together based on shared values and mutual respect rather than inheritance or obligation. When our head of production announced her pregnancy, we celebrated with cake in the break room and spent time figuring out how to accommodate her needs as a new mother. When our lead sustainability coordinator's husband was diagnosed with cancer, the entire company rallied to support their family with meal deliveries, child care assistance, and flexible work arrangements. This was what family was supposed to look like. People taking care of each other because they chose to, not because they were obligated to. 7 years after Bernard's death, I received an unexpected phone call. Caleb's voice was different. Older, more tired than I remembered. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble. "What?" "Mom's dying. Cancer like Dad. She wants to see you." I was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" I asked finally. "She wants to apologize," he said. "For what we did, for what we planned." "And what do you want?" I asked. "I want to apologize, too," he said quietly. "I've had 7 years to think about what we did to you. What I did to you." I agreed to visit, though I wasn't sure why. Caleb's mother, Martha, had always been kind to me during our marriage. She'd welcomed me into the family, taught me family recipes, and shared stories about Bernard's childhood and their early marriage. I found her in a hospital bed that looked exactly like the one where Bernard had spent his final days. The irony was painful. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice weak but clear. "How are you feeling?" I asked, settling into the bedside chair. "Like I'm dying," she said with a slight smile, "but also like I need to clear my conscience before I go." She told me that she'd known about her children's plan to push me out of the company. She'd even participated in some of the planning sessions. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared that Bernard was giving away my children's inheritance to someone who wasn't really family, but after he died. And after I saw what you built with Zenith Fabrics, I realized he was right." She continued, "You were more family to him than we were. You earned what he gave you," she said. "My children wanted to inherit it. There's a difference." We talked for an hour about business, family, and the choices that define our lives. Before I left, she gave me a small box. "These were Bernard," she said. "His father's cuff links. He would have wanted you to have them." Inside the box was a note in Bernard's handwriting. "For someone who understands what it means to build something that lasts." Martha died 2 weeks later. Her funeral was small, just immediate family and a few close friends. I attended, sitting in the back, unsure of my place in this gathering of people who'd once planned to betray me. During the service, Caleb stood up to speak about his mother. "She taught us about loyalty," he said. "About standing by the people you love even when it's difficult." He paused and looked directly at me. "She also taught us in the end about admitting when you're wrong." After the service, we stood awkwardly by my car. "Do you think you could ever forgive us?" he asked. "I already have," I said. "Holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you." "What about us?" he asked. "Do you think we could ever?" "No," I said gently but firmly. "Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken." "I know," he said. "I just had to ask." As I drove away from the cemetery, I thought about forgiveness and fresh starts and the complexity of human relationships. I'd forgiven the Sterling family for their betrayal, but that didn't mean I was willing to risk being hurt by them again. Some relationships can be repaired, others are too damaged to rebuild. The key is knowing the difference. 10 years after Bernard's death, Zenith Fabrics had become one of the most respected textile companies in the region. We employed over 800 people, operated 3 manufacturing facilities, and had achieved B Corp certification for our commitment to social and environmental responsibility. I'd also married again to Dr. David Anderson, a hospital administrator I'd met during one of Martha's treatments. David understood my commitment to building ethical businesses and supported my work without trying to control or change it. Our wedding was small and joyful, filled with the chosen family I built over the years. Employees who'd become friends, business partners who'd become mentors, and community members who'd supported Zenith Fabrics' growth. Bernard would have been proud. At the reception, I gave a toast that summarized what I'd learned from the most difficult decade of my life. "I've learned that inheritance isn't just about money or property." I said, "The most valuable inheritance is the example of how to live with integrity, how to treat people with respect, and how to build something meaningful that outlasts your own life." Bernard Sterling left me more than a business. He left me a blueprint for how to lead with honor. And all of you, my chosen family, have helped me understand that the best legacy is the one you build together with people who share your values. I'm sitting in my office now looking out at the production floor where hundreds of people work to create sustainable textiles for customers around the world. Zenith Fabrics is planning to open our first international facility next year, and we're developing new partnerships with artisan cooperatives in developing countries. Sometimes visitors ask me about the name change from Sterling Weave to Zenith Fabrics. Zenith is about honoring the best of what came before while building something new. I tell them it's about understanding that tradition isn't just about preserving the past. It's about preserving the values that make the past worth honoring. I never mention the family betrayal, the conspiracy, or the legal battles. Some stories are too personal to share with strangers. But sometimes when I'm mentoring young entrepreneurs or advising family businesses, I share the most important lesson I learned. Don't assume that family relationships guarantee loyalty, and don't assume that loyal people can't become family. The people who show up consistently, who support your best self, and who share your commitment to building something meaningful, those are your real family, regardless of blood or marriage or legal documents. Last month, I received a letter from a business school student who was writing her thesis about family business succession planning. She'd heard about the transition from Sterling Weave to Zenith Fabrics and wanted to understand how leadership changes can revitalize struggling companies. I agreed to be interviewed, though I focused on the business aspects rather than the personal drama. What advice would you give to family businesses struggling with succession planning? She asked. Merit should matter more than birthright, I said. The person who's most qualified to lead should lead regardless of their last name or their relationship to the current owner. How do you identify the right successor? Look for someone who sees the business as a responsibility, not just an opportunity. Someone who's willing to work for the privilege of leadership rather than simply expecting it. What about family dynamics? How do you handle relatives who feel entitled to leadership roles? Sometimes protecting a family legacy means protecting it from family members who would damage it, I said carefully. The student published her thesis 6 months later. It became required reading in several business school programs, and I started receiving speaking requests from universities and business organizations. I realized I had something valuable to share. A perspective on leadership, loyalty, and the true meaning of family that could only come from someone who'd lost one family and built another. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities, which led to writing a book about ethical leadership in family businesses, Zenith Leadership, Building Business Legacies. That last was published 3 years ago and became a bestseller in the business category. The book tells the story of how companies can transition from traditional family ownership to merit-based leadership while preserving their core values and culture. I used Zenith Fabrics as a case study, though I changed the names and some details to protect the privacy of people involved. The book's success opened doors I'd never expected. I was invited to join corporate boards, speak at international conferences, and advise government agencies on small business development. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Last year, the Regional Commerce Alliance created the Bernard Sterling Award for Ethical Leadership. It's given annually to a business leader who demonstrates integrity, loyalty, and commitment to building sustainable enterprises. I was the first recipient. During the award ceremony, I wore Bernard's father's cufflinks, the ones Martha had given me before she died. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the difference between inheriting a legacy and earning one. Bernard Sterling understood that true legacy isn't about what you leave behind, I said. It's about what you inspire others to build. He gave me the opportunity to prove that loyalty and competence matter more than bloodlines. He trusted me to preserve what was best about his family's heritage while building something new and better. I hope that everyone who receives this award in the future will remember that the greatest honor isn't being chosen, it's being worthy of the choice. After the ceremony, several people approached me with their own stories of family business conflicts and succession challenges. I realized that my experience with the Sterling family had given me insights that could help other people navigate similar situations. That's why I'm telling this story now, not for revenge or vindication. Those feelings faded years ago, but because there are other people out there who are working to build something meaningful, only to discover that the people they trusted most are planning to betray them. There are people who are giving their best efforts to preserve family legacies only to be seen as outsiders who don't deserve what they've helped create. There are people who are struggling to understand the difference between earned trust and inherited privilege. If you're one of those people, I want you to know you don't have to accept betrayal as inevitable. You don't have to settle for being undervalued by people who should appreciate your contributions. You don't have to choose between your integrity and your security. Sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the family you're born into. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful and meaningful that it speaks for itself. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly what you need to become who you were meant to be. Bernard Sterling changed his will the day before he died because he understood something his biological children never learned. Legacy isn't about blood. It's about character. Inheritance isn't about entitlement. It's about responsibility. Family isn't about shared DNA. It's about shared values. And sometimes the person who deserves to carry on your life's work is the one who earned it rather than the one who expected it.